Lesson 6, we're going to get some more practice with solving quadratic equations. In class, we're going to do some modeling, so I want to take this opportunity to practice some more. Some of these answers might have radicals in their solutions. Remember that radical is another word for roots. If we look at the first problem here, ordinarily I would just probably want to add the 9 to each side. But I have to always remember that if I am not dealing with a square as a coefficient, I cannot do that. I cannot factor out doing a difference of squares. So I have to factor out the 3. That means I'm left with x squared minus 3, which 3 is also not a square. So what I have in this particular example is I have a situation where I might just end up with an answer that is still in root form. And you'll see what this means. I'm going to divide each side by 3. Then I'm going to add 3 to each side. And I'm left with x squared equals 3. Now, an exponent is the opposite of a root. So what I would have to do in here to get rid of this exponent is take the root, the square root to be exact. So in here my answer is x equals the square root of 3. Now I put a plus or minus because if you have a negative number and you raise it to the power of 2, it's going to end up being a positive. Now if I try to solve this the way that I initially wanted to, which means I'm going to add 9 to each side, I'm going to show you that you would probably still get the same answer. 3x squared, divide each side by 3, then I'm going to get x squared equals 3. And then I would still have to take the root, which means your answer is still going to be plus or minus the square root of 3. Now, whenever you have these answers, they're hard to check, but if you have a graphing calculator, you can plug the whole equation in and see if it works. Like so. This works for a positive square root of 3, but a negative square root of 3 also works because you're raising the entire group to the exponent. So negative times negative is going to give you a positive, which means you're going to get the same answer. Let's look at the next problem. In the next problem, you have to realize that the exponent stands for the whole group. So you don't actually have to multiply this out. You can just take the square root of each side, and then you're left with x minus 3 equals plus or minus square root of 1. Now we know that the square root of 1 is a 1, but I'm going to leave it separate for now so that you can see the two different scenarios. So we have x could be 3 plus square root of 1 or 3 minus square root of 1. So in either case, you have two completely different answers that you're going to have to plug in and try. So as I said before, I'm going to go ahead and simplify now. And square root of 1 is 1. So that means that x could be a 4 or x could be a 2. So what you want to do is you want to plug these both in and see which one works. We see that a positive 4 works, and we also see that a 2 works. So both are going to be answers, especially because we don't have the context of a word problem to decide. So let's look at number 3. Similar to number 2, we're going to divide each side by 4, and then we're going to take the square root of the whole group. That leaves you with x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 1/4. Now, you know that the square root of 4 is a 2 because 2 squared is 4. And so when we have the square root of 1/4, if you plug this in your calculator, you'll actually see that the same applies and you'll get an answer of 1/2. Now, because this is a plus or minus situation, you're going to have two scenarios where x minus 3 equals a positive 1/2 or x minus 3 equals a negative 1/2. And then you just simply do the work. Now in algebra, we tend to want to keep things as a fraction, keeps numbers as a fraction, because it just makes it easier when we plug them in. So this is going to be 3.5. But if you gave a decimal, that'll be okay too. And that is going to be a 2.5. And then you just have to plug it in. You want to take care of your exponents first in here for order of operations. This is a common student mistake. And you see why we keep things as a fraction. It makes it easier when we're simplifying. We can simply divide 4 by 4. That will give us a positive 1. So both answers work in here. We don't have the context of a word problem. They both make the equation true. Now go ahead and try this one on your own. Pause the video, and I'll give you the answer in a minute. All right, so this is what we do. We divide each side by 2 first, and then we take the root. We have x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. So we're going to have two situations here. One is going to be a positive square root of 6, and the other one's going to be a negative square root of 6. We add 3 to each side, and so our answers are 3 plus square root of 6 or 3 minus square root of 6. Now we can't simplify square root of 6, so it stays there.